Good evening, all of you. I think after that, very interesting start to regulation, focusing on regulatory framework and judicial review. This session, we will try and get into some more granular discussion on both the general theme of regulation and some specific domains. We have regulators from very diverse disciplines, and the idea is to try and carry forward a bit of what we started in the previous session. But before I do that, we just a couple of slides on what is it that we do in the area, in public policy and specifically in the area of regulation. You guys know about Ashoka. I don't need to spend time explaining to you what Ashoka does. The new center, which is the ISEC Center for Public Policy, the idea is to try and build India's leading public policy center focused on accelerated, inclusive, and sustainable growth in India. 4 priority areas, which are reflected in the sessions that you will see. Agriculture, rural economy, on which we have discussions tomorrow. Employment and labor, the first panel tomorrow. Regulation, which is the panel now, and public finance. I think the big advantage that I see in doing a lot of this work in ICPP is the fact that perhaps we are among the few, perhaps there are a few more that I'm not fully familiar with, but a center that is embedded in the university ecosystem. And I think the advantage of being embedded in the university ecosystem with access to all of the professors and the departments and the functional areas, I think makes us sort of somewhat uniquely placed to be able to do what we are hoping to do in those 4 areas. Perhaps I can take this legitimate credit, Prachi. Among the first activities that the center started, literally within a few days of its founding, was the executive education program that we did in Mumbai exactly a year ago, focused on financial sector regulation. And essentially all of the best big funds of India, mutual funds, many of the banks, many of the venture capital funds, private equity funds, a lot of their senior management, compliance people, legal people were present. 2 days of very focused, both sort of conceptual and operational issues of regulation. We had the former governor, Dr. Subbarao. We had former SEBI chairman, Mr. Sinha, Mr. Sahu, who's perhaps been in more regulators than one can count, chairman of IBBI, member of CCI, whole-time member of SEBI, former staff of NSC, the chief executive of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India. You name the regulator, he's probably had something to do with them. Mr. CKG Nair, who was a member of the Securities Appellate Tribunal, Mr. Padmanabhan, who retired as ED RBI. I'm just listing a few of them. The idea was we need to be useful in terms of operational practical impact, not just a pure academic sort of research-oriented center. So the attempt was, could we start with something on which quick delivery is possible? So this was the program in Bombay. Currently, we're building a team. This is not an area where it's easy to get high-quality resource. We are in the process. There are many sort of work programs that we have. I just want to briefly talk about one program on which the attempt is, like I think all public policy centers should be doing, to do a collaborative project. The attempt is to try and get that big magnum opus on regulation that India desperately needs. The idea is to look at economic theory, public administration, and public policy, but all in the Indian constitutional context. So basically attempt a whole set of chapters on regulatory theory as applicable to India. And those of us who are working on India will recognize that a lot of this is knowledge that needs to be specific and to be built up in the context of India. After an attempt at some 10 or 12 chapters on regulatory theory, which is sector agnostic. There are basic principles of regulation which are applicable to food safety, pharma regulation, financial sector regulation. There is the good standard Indian constitutional hygiene and safety that we need to look at in terms of regulatory design. So the first, sort of the 1/3 part of the book will focus on regulatory theory. The second is on specific sectoral regulators. And we are looking at only 15. And last count at the union level, there are at least 23. We are not counting state level regulators. So this is an exploding area. So the idea is to get some discussions on sectoral regulators and then also try and get deep thinkers who are not in the area of regulation, just good thinkers to reflect on what we have done. That is the regulatory theory part, the sectoral regulators part, and get them to look at what has been done. Does it make sense in the Indian context? How should one sort of take this forward? It's an ambitious project, a long-term project, involves multiple institutions. ICPP is the lead in terms of very generous financial as well as administrative support. We are in the process of talking to the identified authors and the institutions that are collaborating with us. All going well, in the next conference, we should be able to give you a much more robust update on where we are. Now, with that, I'll get into what we plan to do now in the next hour or so. The idea is to focus on both the generic notion of regulation, but very quickly get into, in our case, pharma, because we'll have the serving pharma regulator of India speaking to us. Talk about electricity regulation. We have the person who was still recently the chair of the Delhi Electricity Regulatory Commission, and get the recently appointed Director General of Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs to look at the regulatory agencies in the sphere of corporate affairs. And there is a large number: Insolvency, Bankruptcy Board, Competition Commission of India, NAFRA, a whole bunch of professional regulators. So the idea is to get a discussion on 3 sectoral regulators. But before that, get a scholar, an academic, to speak about the notion of regulation, both in the economic and in the public policy sense. Regulation as a state intervention essentially addresses clearly identified market failures, negative externalities, concentration of power, and information asymmetry. That's the theoretical starting point. You could do regulation within government, and government departments historically in India have been regulators, and they continue to be regulators. The registrar of companies is a department, an attached office within the government, continues to be perhaps the most sort of regulator with the most wide, extensive touch points in India. Or you could have statutory regulatory authorities, namely bodies created by law, distinct and separate from a government department, and at an arm's length from government. A lot of the work on regulation, at least the recent work on regulation post-90s, focuses on this, essentially for the reasons that we went into when we discussed briefly with Justice Ramasubramaniam. Namely, this is a strange body, because this body combines the powers of all 3 organs of the Indian state: legislative, executive, and judicial. That makes it a very heavy-handed state intervention, and I think as citizens, all of us need to watch, because power, we spoke about concentration of power being a market failure, but concentration of power in the hands of public agencies very often leads to state failure. So there is a concern, but as a rule, if you were to ask me, statutory regulatory authorities in India have overall yielded very good outcomes, whether it's safety, quality, market development. So if it was a multiple choice question, I think the clear answer is yes. But if it was an essay type question, there are challenges. The first challenge I alluded to, separation of powers, is a concern. Inadequate checks and balances and weak accountability mechanisms. In many of these regulatory agencies, the regulated entities will seldom speak up because their existence depends on being on the right side of the regulator. The common citizens couldn't be concerned, and there is the regulatory accountability framework put in place by Parliament vis-a-vis accountability to the Parliament, to the Committee on Subordinate Legislation, etc., does not work very well. There's enough evidence on this. So there are concerns, but despite these concerns, clearly Indian politics believes this is working because there is an upsurge of regulators in India, and my last calculation showed me that close to 2/3 or perhaps 75% of India's GDP is actually now regulated by statutory regulators, not by government departments. It's something from a macro sense we should be watching out for. And here is a partial list of regulators. And I do this periodically in all my classes. Anyone who's able to get all the abbreviations right gets a couple of extra drinks this evening. The challenge is, it's a very paradoxical challenge. There are regulators where we need strong strengthening of autonomy, strong strengthening of the expertise base, and much greater empowerment. Equally, there are a bunch of regulators where we probably need to be doing the opposite. We need to be worried much more about accountability, rule of law. So like in all issues of public policy, we have paradoxes. And to discuss these, we have 4 people with us today. I'll invite all 4 of them to join me on the dais, and I'll begin with the introduction of the first one. But before I start introducing the first speaker, I will request Dr. Ajay Shah, XKDR Forum, Mumbai, Dr. Rajiv Raghuvanshi, the Director General of the full formal designation is Central Drugs Standards Control Organization. Did I get that right, Rajiv? CDSCO. He is the Director General or the Drugs Controller of India. The Mr. Gyaneshwar Kumar Singh, Director General of Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, and Justice Jayant Nath, former judge of the Delhi High Court until recently, Chairman of the Delhi Electricity Regulatory Commission. May I request you to join me on the dais? And we can go in this order. Ajay, will you be okay going first? So I'll now request Ajay. Ajay is a researcher with XKDR Forum. Please be seated. Currently based in Mumbai, and he will essentially speak about the generic notions of regulation, set the context in a sense. By training, he started off as an aeronautical engineer from IIT Mumbai, and then did a PhD in economics from University of Southern California, and perhaps one of the most influential scholars and thinkers in public economics, working across related disciplines, prolific author of both research papers and popular articles, involved in securities market reforms since the early 90s, mid-90s, part of the framework creation team for risk management in our then new exchange called NSE Clearing Corporation, member of many formal Government of India committees on finance, taxation, regulatory reform. So Ajay, you have about 8-10 minutes to speak on regulation, regulatory design in the context of India. Thank you. Do you want to do it from there, or I'm here? Whatever is convenient.
Um, I'm very grateful to the organizers for having me here today. I'm sure most of you in this room have never taken interest in regulation. Okay? Neither did I. I was a happy, naive person once, and I thought that you could live your life as an economist in India without needing to get into the intricacies of regulation. Boy, I was wrong. Okay, so there's a beautiful phrase in the field of water and sanitation where they say, don't fix the pipes, fix the institutions that fix the pipes. Okay, so it is hopeless to try to take one bad piece of work by government after another and try to get engaged in the detail of solving these things. I did that for 20 years, and the rate at which bad knowledge and bad ideas are being put out by government is so high that there is not enough bandwidth in the world to solve it. So you have to go deeper. You have to go to the root cause and change these things at a deeper level. And that brings you to the words regulatory theory, that we're not going to talk at a level of detail about what is a security and what is a market failure in securities and what is the most optimal nature of intervention or banking regulation or drug quality regulation and so on. But we're going to think more deeply about how is this done? How can it be done better? How can these organizations work more effectively? Because there is simply not enough civil society and intellectual capability in India to solve the dozens of decisions and documents emanating out of these organizations every day. So there are two different ways to come at the questions of regulatory theory. One way is to think that, okay, as Krishnan correctly said, governments in India have done regulation forever from within the confines of a department of the government. So if the government should choose to contract out its work of regulation to some external agency, okay, it could be the Reserve Bank, it could be the SEBI, it could be FSSAI. Okay, there is a nature of a principal-agent relationship between the parliament and each of these organizations. And then you've got to ask, what is the nature of that contract? How do you demand performance? How do you get performance? Why will work be done correctly? And wherever the work is done, it's got to be done correctly. So by merely contracting out, we haven't solved the problem. By contracting out, we've created the potential for a nature of an agency relationship that will push to performance by creating more accountability as compared with the long route of accountability that you get in a government department. The second way to see this is coming from a more constitutional law point of view in India, which is the kind of discussion that Krishnan and
Justice Ramasubramanian.
No, I am not able to see him. Okay, fine. And Justice Ramasubramanian were having a moment ago, which is around the philosophy of what does it mean to be a liberal democracy. And there you get to these questions, that there is excessive concentration of power in some regulators in India. Separation of powers has been violated. We are fusing the legislative, the executive, and the judicial functions into single organizations. Ever since the 17th century, we have known that this goes badly. There is a loss of rule of law where arbitrary power has been given to officials inside these agencies, and many regulated industries have lost economic dynamism because once you understand the nature of how the regulator and that industry work, then really there's no private entry that can happen, or there is a loss of interest in private entry. So as Krishnan said, large parts of the Indian economy are now covered by one regulator or another. And again, we have seen that there is a loss of economic dynamism. These things tend to get locked up. There are a couple of players, and there's a central planning system. The regulator tells everybody what an ATM has to look like, what a telephone has to look like, and the industry just becomes a bunch of implementers of a central planning idea. So this is the importance of the field of regulatory theory. So even if you have thought that you have no interest in regulatory theory, okay, this is an important field, and all of us need to understand it. All of us need to get involved. Many of us in this room are dealing with day-to-day tactical battles at the last mile, at the output of a present regulator. We try to write a newspaper article saying X is wrong. We try to go meet one joint secretary and we say to them Y is wrong. This is a largely hopeless endeavor. It has not worked. It will not work. I have done it for 20 years. There is not enough bandwidth. There's not enough capacity to meaningfully move the nature of regulation in India. You have to go upstream. You have to go to the root cause. So I want to talk as an example about Prachi's question, that the economists want to do monetary policy independence. And I do. I'm 100% in favor of the idea of monetary policy independence. So the interest rate setting of the central bank should be immune to politics, not 100 other things that you might place in an organization that happens to be called a central bank. But interest rate setting belongs under a zone of monetary policy independence. Regulatory theory knows how to do it. So how will you create an unelected authority with independence under a constitutional scheme? So you will need an accountability mechanism, that's called the inflation target. Then you will need to think through very gritty political economy about appointments and the extent to which civil servants or other direct employees, appointments of the government, will be responsive to the requests for doing things differently in monetary policy. And that takes you to the idea of a monetary policy committee, where there should be a large proportion of independent citizens who are not direct appointees of the government, and you create the transparency and you create the checks and balances, and that's how we achieve monetary policy independence. So this is just an example that the economics guides us on objectives. So there's some market failure and you want to do regulation, you don't want to do central planning. Regulatory theory knows how to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ajay. Very, very clear exposition on what are the generic questions. I'll now call upon Dr. Rajiv Raghuvanshi, Director General of the Central Drugs Standards Control Organization, more popularly known to all of you as the Drugs Controller General of India. He joined this position in February 23. Those of us who are familiar with this domain will immediately recognize the very unusual scholarship and professional industry experience that Rajiv brings to the job. He trained in IIT BHU and then the National Institute of Immunology, New Delhi, where he obtained his PhD. Thereafter, for many years, he worked in the industry, including in Ranbaxy, Dr. Reddy's laboratories. In this role, he successfully led the effort to get many products approved, including by the US FDA. He personally holds 90, I repeat, 90 granted patents, US patents, and has published more than 70 peer-reviewed publications in serious journals. In the Indian context, unusual, very unusually for somebody so successful in the private sector, Rajiv chose to become Secretary cum Scientific Director of the Indian Pharmacopoeia Commission in February 2021. Less than, just about 2 years that he spent in the IPC brought about multiple transformational changes that impact the quality and standards for medicines in India. He joined the present position immediately thereafter. Rajiv, we understand that both you and Gyanesh are serving government servants, and unlike Ajay, who can put on his Los Angeles heretical hat and speak freely, you're welcome to sort of speak given your positions. But even for an attached office, you've perhaps done far more than what independent regulators have done. So I'm sure you will know how to navigate this audience and speak. Would you like to speak from here, or? Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Krishnan and organizers for giving me this opportunity. So I'll start with just letting you know that I do not have any history with policy making. I know almost zero about what policy is. Maybe in my work, I would have a lot of things which would have impacted policies or would have helped making policies, but I really don't know. What Dr. Shah spoke, I actually couldn't understand much. So to set the context, I regulate an industry in India or a domain in India which has a trade value of about 50 billion US dollars, and 50% of it is from exports and 50% is a domestic revenue. And we export to more than 200 countries in the world. We supply 40% of generic medicine consumed in US and saved their trillions of dollars by now. We also export to UK, where 25% of all the medicines consumed is actually supplied from India. 60 to 70% of vaccine demand of the world is actually supplied from India. So huge responsibility from global public health point of view, but at the same time, huge responsibility on the drug regulator to meet the so high expectation from world over, including India. And without going into a lot of details about what regulation is doing currently, when I took over, I wanted to do something more impactful. That's why I left a comfortable job from corporate and came to government. And when I see last 2 years, I actually find that I did a lot of things which actually gives me far more satisfaction than what I used to get in corporate sector. And why I'm telling you is that this has to do with the public in India and beyond. And a lot of whatever we do immediately, you can see the impact the next day. When I took over, it was not a very good time from regulatory point of view. It was a time when the cough syrup issues were happening and the whole world was behind India. And that was the time when I was given this responsibility. And since then, it's today that for last 1.5 years, we have not had any red flag from any international agencies about the quality of the medicines being exported. So that's the biggest comfort which we get today. Regulatory wise, we have not changed much. It was all execution of regulation which we already had. We did a lot of no structural changes because it goes to parliament or maybe ministry at the highest level for changes. But we did a lot of operational changes and brought more and more transparency in the system, in the execution, and that's how we actually could manage the issues, which tells me that regulatory strength, whatever we have, is more than enough to manage the show. What is more important is how we execute it, especially in the pharma regulation. And this has been proven beyond doubt when we see the current situation and what was there some time back. So my experience of last 2 years and last 30 years when I was on the other side of the table. So we have few very structural issues in our drug regulation which need to be addressed. Though we are managing it with this, but if we can change and do those changes, I think we will be in a much better situation to manage. And that's where I think the policy thing comes into play. The first one which I see is the federal structure of the regulation. And the regulatory system in India, drug regulatory system in India is actually divided between the center and the state. And center has no overriding power over states. So both of them are completely independent. So this actually many a times brings lots of frustration in the system that state doesn't listen to what actually should be done, and they do independently something which actually is detrimental to the whole regulation and ultimately the outcome, which is the quality of the medicines. But you cannot do anything. You can just simply write letters and request to them that this is not right, please don't do it. But sometimes it's on their mercy. They listen, they don't listen. Um, so there is no oversight from anybody. It's only their local bosses who manage that, and then there are issues related to that. This also brings some 34 countries and union territories. We have a big issue of harmonization. Some of these states, and there is only one regulation. Regulation is central, which is executed by all the states. So we have issue of harmonization. The some state do it better than others, and since as per regulation, the manufacturing happens in one state and gets distributed in all over the country, we have many a times issue where two states are actually fighting with each other about how to solve the issue or for the support even. And then there also there is no overriding anybody who can actually give direction to any of them. So that's a big issue which need to be solved. It has been, I mean, in the past people tried to bring some amendments in the act, but because of the interest of some sectors, none of them actually went through at the act level. Very, very few act amendments have happened. Lots of rule amendments have happened, but act no. And this federal structure comes from the act. So it's a difficult thing. We don't know how to change it actually as outcome. We have created there is a constitutional body, statutory body within the regulation which creates a platform called Drug Consultative Committee, where all the states and center regulators sit together and discuss issues. But discussion is one thing, but ultimately when it comes to implementation, then we face that problem of independent decisions. So for me, these kind of systems work better when there is a maturity in the system at the society level, at the regulators level, at the customer level. And my thinking is that as a country, we are not at that level today, where we are mature enough to understand the need of other state or other partner and take decisions accordingly. Many a times we fail there. So that's so there is a platform, but the effectiveness of that platform is always a question mark. And I haven't seen much. Last 2 years we have been trying a lot, and we got a lot of successful in increasing the coordination, increasing the engagement, and that has helped us a lot in changing the scenario on ground. But again, it becomes a person dependent. I came, I wanted, I did it with my skills of my corporate training, but maybe if someone else is there, may not be, maybe more successful than, or maybe less successful than. So it becomes, it's not a system driven phenomena at this point of time. Second big issue which we have, which I have been hearing in some other presentations also, this country somehow has not taken pharma regulation so seriously, and it has always been on the low priority of people who matter. One of the outcomes is this country has not developed a deep thinking or a research infrastructure or organization which does research and deep thinking in pharma regulation and pharma quality. Both, and both of them are very important for a country like India, which is supplying medicines and drugs to the whole world. And there is a big disconnect between what is expectation from the world and what on the ground we are doing it here. Whatever success we have, about 50% of medicines being exported and exported to highest regulated markets in the world like US and Western Europe, that happens because export in pharma is dependent on the needs of the importing country. So it makes business sense for many companies to do what they want, what their importer wants. But when the same company is making products and supplying in India, they do not meet that quality, because the business sense doesn't support that for them. So we need, very badly need a system or a institute or a group which can actually do deep thinking and research in pharma regulation in this country and pharma quality in this country. Whatever happens today in a very small way, that is more of feeding the operational requirement of the system and the country. They train, they do some research, they do postgraduate courses just to supply a trained manpower or a manpower to get trained by industry on job and take care of their filings in India or outside India. So pure operational, no deep thinking, which is a big issue for me. The third issue which we have is structural issue, that the controller in India is not having a scientific cadre in the regulatory system, and it is a very it's a very technical job. So when I review a file which is filed by an applicant, a company, on say the latest technology based product, a medicine, I do not have a single person internally who understands that language. So the people who are there in CDSCO, they are all trained for the legal aspect of the regulation, to execute the legal aspect, do audits, check at the papers, legal papers, whether they are there or not. The moment it comes to science, 101% we are dependent on external experts. We have expert bodies, and that brings another issue with us, that there is no consistency in the decision of different. So for the same product, same issue, two different expert committees at two different time points can give actually two different advisory, and one of them can try to overrule the previous decision. So a lot of operational issues there also. But that's what it is. So it's a structural. Fortunately, I have been able to convince government to basically give us this whole line in the form of new appointment. Let's see when it happens. And another big issue which currently we should have, which I feel, is that, as I said, the whole organization is operational in nature. Within the organization, there is nobody who thinks about the strategy, the softer part of the whole operation, that where is the need for amendment, what kind of resources you need to look at the files. So that all is very ad hoc. So we need to have, probably it's high time we need to have two different channels or streams in the organization, one looking at the strategic part of the regulation and one other looking at the operational part of the organization. But in spite of all that, I think we have done a good job. A lot of feedback, positive feedback is coming from the ground. The stakeholders are happy the way things have been changing in last 2 years, and I think we are on the right path, and you will see many more changes happening on the ground in times to come. Thanks a lot for your patient hearing.
Thank you. Thanks, Rajiv. I now have the honor to invite Justice Jayant Nath. Jayant completed his undergrad degree in economics from St. Stephen's, after which he joined the Campus Law Center, University of Delhi, where he obtained his LLB degree. He was designated as a senior advocate by the High Court of Delhi in May 2006. In 2013 April, he became an additional judge of the Delhi High Court, and subsequently became a regular permanent judge and retired from this position in 2021. After his retirement, while he was practicing and continues to be practicing as a senior advocate in the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court appointed him by a court order as a pro-term chairperson of the Delhi Electricity Regulatory Commission, which he held, the charge he held till very recently. It's my privilege, Jayant, to invite you to talk about issues facing electricity regulation in India. About 8-10 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan. As the learned earlier speaker said, my forte is actually the legal profession. It's a matter of chance that I entered into the fora of regulators. It was an interesting experience, a very learning experience. Even as a young lawyer, I had argued a lot before the High Court for the electricity companies, which at that time was state-owned. Delhi Desu, which was the famous Desu for the old Delhiites who would remember that famous organization, which got converted to Delhi Vidyut Board. At the outset, I can say, thanks to regulation, the situation in the electricity field has improved immensely, specifically in Delhi. It was one of the most chaotic fields in India, in Delhi, was the electricity field. I still remember having power cuts for hours together at one stretch. It was estimated that the transmission and distribution losses, thanks to hooking of the distribution lines, was almost 52%. And all that changed in 1998 onwards, when the first regulatory commission for Delhi in the electricity sector was incorporated. And that, from that date till today, if we see, the electricity sector has seen a revolutionary change in Delhi, to the extent that you get a reasonable amount of, you can say, reasonably uninterrupted supply of electricity. The transmission and distribution losses, which was the theft of electricity essentially, which was at around 52% at that time, is now down to almost 6%, which is, in my opinion, a huge success. The distribution and transmission systems have been put in place, and largely, I would say, this feature which has followed from the fact that regulators were kicked in 2000 by around 2000 odd. Having said that, I cannot help also pointing out, fortunately I'm not holding office, so I can say so, that electricity is a very political subject. 1 rupee rise of price, and whichever political party is in the opposition is going to raise a hue and cry. You will have newspaper reports next day saying, wow, look at this, what is happening. And why it always happens. So, it being a political subject, having fiercely independent regulators becomes a little difficult. All governments who seek to appoint a regulator would also try and pressurize the regulators to ensure that that the consumers are not harmed in any manner. The work of a regulator is to strike a balance. The electricity distribution in distribution companies, the generating companies have to get a reasonable amount for whatever work they are doing. The consumers also expect that the prices at which the service or electricity is provided is reasonable. It's a difficult balancing task, and invariably becomes highly politicized. I understand at earlier periods there used to be demonstrations outside the office of the Regulatory Commission whenever attempts were made to change the tariff structure. Yes, there is still a lot of scope for improvement, I would say. An independent regulatory board with competent persons is really an essential necessity, which will further, I think, strengthen the whole structure. When you deal with electricity, and framing tariff is one of the major functions that a electricity regulator does, you need an expertise of three good persons: somebody trained in law, somebody trained in accounts, and somebody who is trained in technically on the electricity subject. These three combinations are rarely available in one gentleman. So you need a good, strong team who are strong in the legal field, strong in accounts, strong in technical aspects. These three gentlemen have to coordinate to come up with a nice structure of tariff and regulations. Unfortunately, that is a big issue. The whole system of recruitment in the electricity boards is a bit ad hoc, and these are small organizations, state electricity boards, state regulatory commissions. 40, 50, 70 employees are there. Most of them are on contract or on deputation from the bigger public sector undertakings. They don't have a commitment, they don't have the experience. Now there is an attempt to delegate this. That's time for me to leave, I think.
It was my doing.
to delegate this functioning to some of the bigger management firms, because they have the officers with the expertise in accounts, in law and technical experts. That's a questionable concept, because you are outsourcing adjudicatory process to an outside party, because it involves complex issues. So this is an area that needs to be strengthened, and hopefully if it is done, and you have good experts who have a long-term interest in being in that field, it will help a lot in generating regulations and in generating tariffs which further improve the performance of the sector. As I said, it has its shortcomings, the regulatory process, but in the electricity field, in the long run, it has done a lot. The technology is improving. We are now moving away from thermal generation to renewable energy and all. So it needs a constant monitoring, a constant incentive to the incoming renewable energy sources. All this, of course, regulators will have to push hard, and having good, trained, competent electors would also be very, very necessary for the future. And we hope it all goes on well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jayant. Our final speaker for the day is Shri Gyaneshwar Kumar Singh, who very recently, less than a week ago, took charge as Director General and Chief Executive Officer of the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs. It's incidentally a post that he held many years ago as an additional charge while in the ministry. In addition to his MPhil in sociology, Gyanesh holds an MBA as well as an LLB, a degree from the University of Delhi. He was part of the Indian P&T Accounts and Finance Service, which he joined in 1992. And among other positions that he worked in was as JS Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs for 5 years between 2016 and 21. In this tenure, he dealt with all the issues relating to the newly created Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, the IBBI, the code, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. He was also the officer in charge of another area on which we should be doing a lot of work, which is the tribunals. The NCLT, NCLAT related work in Ministry of Corporate Affairs, something that he handled. He also handled all of the legal framework issues relating to CSR. He has now joined this institution, which is like an in-house think tank of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which incidentally holds the largest number of statutory regulators in India of all ministries. It's the largest holder of regulators. So it's a sector, it's an area on which IICA, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, all going well, are poised to do a lot of work. May I now request Gyanesh to speak for about 8-10 minutes on the regulators in the corporate law domain. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to structure 8 to 10 minutes into some positive, optimistic development in the area of regulatory governance, and how Ministry of Corporate Affairs, generally the regulators are shy, they don't talk much, how the silent revolution is taking place through technology, making life of all of us easier. So I will take one example, and this is linked with also what we are discussing, how to improve regulatory governance framework. Very few regulators, they go for impact assessment because that puts the check and balances and accountability. I will pick up one example. We have in Companies Act, there is a provision 248(2), is voluntary striking off of a company. If you have no assets, company can be removed from the strength of our registry. And somehow, Economic Survey report of 2021, they came with observation. They got this study done by Quality Council of India. So, our ROC, RD, they are in charge, and they come up with a very striking observation, which was difficult for us in the ministry to digest, that this can happen under us. And they came up with the observation that for a voluntary striking off, it takes around 4.3 years. And out of 4.3 years, in number of days, it can be converted into 1,570 days total. More than 1,000 days are consumed in taking NOCs from the relevant regulators or the government department. So we contested, it can't happen, but there was a concern, and we took this opportunity, and as of now, we have a office in Manesar, in my office itself. This is called CPACE, and 2 years we have around, this office was set up in March 23, and 23-24, around 14,000 such companies were given that exit route. And in 24-25, around 12,000 companies were given exit route through this IT intervention. Now everything goes through the system. So it goes through the income tax, SEBI, and there is a concept of, if you don't reply, it will be taken as a deemed NOC, deemed approval. And I was checking up yesterday, last year the time taken was 90 days average. This year it is 60 days. So what we have done it through using the technology. Similarly, most of you, those who are dealing with the ministry, you may be aware that we have CRC, Central Registration Center. Earlier, everyone has to go to the registrar. Now with one application, you get around 11 to 10 PAN, TAN, registration, bank detail, everything. So such a seamless process is there. And government is mindful of the fact we have to do ease of doing business. And somewhere we have, it is not written anywhere, but if you connect the activities, connect the working of the government, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, they are trying to work towards trust-based regulation. Around, there may be 20 lakhs active companies. Out of 20 lakhs active companies, 90% are small. And we have a distinction for a small companies. Recently, we have increased the paid-up capital was 2 crore to 4 crore. Turnover was 20 crore to 40 crore. So 90% of the companies, for that, why this distinction is important, they have a lesser compliance burden. And there is a shortage of time, otherwise I could have gone into the detail what kind of a lesser compliance burden they have. Similarly, what government is doing, those forms which were manually checked by the ROC, now those who are converted into STP mode, around more than 60 forms had been converted, it goes into system directly. And after that, there is a CPC center has been set up. If you are filing those forms, which requires some approval, system will do it. So lots of things. So what I want to say from here, there is a learning. Decriminalization is another story. 2017, we launched a drive. Around 14,000 cases we withdrew from the courts for procedural issues. And after the Companies Act Amendment 2020, again 8,000 cases were withdrawn. So we are trying to work on a system where we have to give maximum ease of doing business, ease of living, those who are connected with us. And when we talk about the regulators, so in regulatory framework, I will talk 2-3 principles which are very important. Since I was a lawmaker also in Solvency Bankruptcy Code, I was the GS, all 6 amendment was done by me. And I was also part of Insolvency Bankruptcy Board as a government nominee. So major challenge, if you ask me, I'm a practitioner, I have seen both my roles. Major challenge for a regulatory governance is the mindset. Because for a government system, the way we recruit the people, all of a sudden you want them, when we are combining all three roles, you require a lot of maturity. And for a lot of maturity, there is no such training. Mr. Sao, Dr. Krishnan has mentioned about him. He has 15 years of experience in regulation. He has written an article in Business Standard. He's saying the most important challenge for regulation is to have the capacity gaps to be addressed. Because we don't have any institution as of now. In IICA, we have a forum, it is called FOIR, Forum of Indian Regulators. But you will be surprised, last 2 days, we are struggling to decide the annual budget. It's 1 crore for their capacity building. So this is the area which needs attention, because unless we develop the capacity. Third one is the silos. Most of the regulators, they are working in the silos. In 2013, there was a move to have some oversight function, because who will regulate the regulator? What about the corporate governance of the regulator? There are some examples in USA and UK, they have some kind of oversight functions. In 2013 also, we tried to work on it, but somehow it has been left. Another important issue is when the regulator is working, regulator has to know the stakeholders. Who are their stakeholders? When business is changing, there are two issues. Business is changing. Now business has more of IT, more of AI, more of a machine learning, more of our blockchain technology. Most of the regulators, they are not aware how to deal with that issue. That's another challenge. And the stakeholder concept is important because when we are going for a regulation, public consultation is very important. Many regulators, they don't go for a public consultation. IBBI was one regulator in 2018. Immediately it was formed in 16. They came with their own framework, how they are going to make the laws. And public consultation is very important. IBBI is one regulator and it applies to all regulators. I am mentioning IBBI, there may be other good regulator also. Assessment is also required, how the regulator has performed. So that is very important. And third one is when we are going for any kind of a regulation, we must have cost benefit analysis. There is another tendency among the regulators is to overreact. Whenever there is a problem, we try to react. Now that this time has come to see all the regulation, what has been framed, whether it is required or not. The last point I will try to sum up is now time has come to see the regulatory framework in a trust-based system. And Honorable Finance Minister in the budget has already identified that we have to go for a trust-based regulation, and for that Honorable Finance Minister has also suggested a high-power committee where non-financial regulator, all their processes, inspection, inquiry, their certification, everything will be reviewed. But interestingly, Honorable Finance Minister in her budget speech, recent budget speech, has also mentioned that impact assessment is also important and that will be done by FSDC. So impact assessment, what I had discussed about the striking of the company, this impact assessment was done by Quality Council of India, and that gave me so much of challenge for us, and we have come up with the success story. So if all regulator, if they are some way assessed periodically, the impact assessment is done, then I feel that the time will come, our quality of regulation will improve. There is another interesting circular by Ministry of Corporate Affairs in January 2024, where they have instructed even CCI has gone for Competition Act has come in 2023. There in Act itself, the need was felt 64A. They mentioned that you have to go for a public consultation. And this paper, it's a press release. Government has accepted that we were not doing much of public consultation. Or regulatory authorities, they should complete their public consultation and they review all the regulation. So this is similarly, SEBI has come recently in February 2025 that we are going for a public consultation framework. But in that missing link is there is no mention of any way we are going for impact assessment of our regulation. So we are doing lots of good things, but there is a need to further improve upon. And if we just go for public consultation, half of the problem will be solved. If regulators are assessed by third party, half of the problem will be solved. Then there is another new field which is new for us. It is nudging. How we can use behavioral science. It is used in UK, United Kingdom, for public policy. So in regulation also, how we can come with a new framework which should be trust-based. We have to change our forms. They have to change our notices. It should not be threatening. So this is the new area. I think this committee, what Honorable Finance Minister has suggested, they will go through all these gamuts of the challenges to improve the regulation, because a regulatory framework, as Dr. Krishnan has summarized, our 75% GDPs are affected with them. So this is the time. So regulatory framework is evolving, but there are challenges also. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Ganesh. We will take questions for about 10 minutes. Raji?
Thank you very much, Dr. Krishnan, and all the panelists. This is not an area I work in, but it was like really eye-opening and, you know, something that affects our life every day. I have many questions, but I'm not going to, you know, raise all of them at this point. One common theme across, probably not Ajay, but the others, was this lack of capacity.
HR.
I think, you know, I think pharma, I think electricity, generally corporate affairs, and so, you know, what is happening on this front, and where do you see the future?
Actually, this area, very few universities, they have course. We have a forum of Indian regulators. Most of the regulators are member. We have 2-3 like conferences where the regulators come. They try to share their own experiences, best practices. We have also a course of 3 months course, but there are very few. I don't know anywhere any kind of a courses are being done. Courses is one part. The course module also has to be designed, because suppose I'm in the ministry, tomorrow I join the board, my mindset will not change, because you have given him what was summarized: legislative, executive, and judiciary, all 3 roles. It requires a lot of maturity. So right now, this is a gap, and I think what Ashoka has started doing, first we have to know the problem, research where we are, and many more such institutions should start taking up this capacity gap issue.
If I may, you know, this is Rajiv, you want to come in? Yeah, after you.
Yeah, so I think for me the most important is there has to be a system to identify and show the mirror that there is a gap. If I see, especially in my domain, the pharma regulation, in the operational engagement, the whole organization is actually running after audits and inspections and raids and all that. Nobody has time, or I don't know, skill or will, whatever it is. Nobody has looked into that. We need to do, I mean, audits and inspection are just 10% of our responsibility. But people have made it 100% of responsibility, and everything else has been lost. So there has to be a system. We have audit system in government, but they look at our maybe financial part, some SOPs which has been made. Are you following those SOPs or not? But actually those SOPs are sufficient or not, that nobody is looking at it. And that is why I said that we need a very, an organization which does deep thinking and research in these domains, so the gaps can be thrown out continuously for the government to see that they need to look into it.
I just add to what Rajiv just said. The audit interference is so much that I almost felt like telling them, "Bhai, aap hi chala lo commission. For every small thing, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this?" As long as the expenditure is bona fide, why are you going so deep into it?
So if I can comment briefly on this, you know, at a generic level, we found out in 2007-8 from the US that this revolving door is a problem. It's not necessarily the complete solution. All of private sector does not necessarily translate to Rajiv. 2, you can only get private sector maybe at the very top. a lot of people will not want to come at DGM level because the salary differentials are huge. You have to give up a career for 3 years. Government servants on deputation, we know that's as problematic as it's a solution. Currently, that's the dominant source for most regulators, but it's not something which can work in the long term. Cadres are not feasible because, as Jayant said, you have a total strength of 40. The professionals there will be 12, 14, 15. A Reserve Bank of India with 16,000 employees can have a cadre. SEBI can have a cadre, but the cadres are now creating a problem because it's a very narrow pyramid. Because there are only 4 deputy governors, and the monetary policy deputy governor will come from the sort of outside. And in the light of what Gyaneshwar said, there will be some external stakeholders which will come in. So the HR problem of statutory regulators is a wicked problem across the world. Terrific public policy work agenda for us. There is a lot of stuff that we've got today which distills into, and in the Indian constitutional context. I guess short-term answer is what Gyanesh said, equivalent of a foyer. We've been part of many of the regulatory training programs. Currently, honestly, they are an apology.
Yeah.
It's 1 month, 1 hour a day. Most of it is online, and I know that half of the class is actually doing Shirsasan when I'm speaking, because they've all said bandwidth kam hai, sunai nahi de raha hai, I'm switching off, which means we know what they're doing. It doesn't work. There is need for very serious capacity building in the short term. Longer term, I think we need to sit and crack this regulatory cadre issue because there are some cross-cutting competencies. Inspections of regulated entities are fundamentally a standard rule of law process. Then there is, as Jayant said, there is a domain expertise. Can we standardize? Which takes us back to the question that Ajay asked. Namely, we need a generic framework because the way the drugs controller works vis-a-vis the drug regulated entity should in principle be the same as the way an IBBI works with its regulated entity in terms of interface. So I think we have a lot of agenda here, some of which we are hoping to tackle in the book. But Gyanesh, you wanted to come in?
What you have summarized, sir, short-term capacity gap can be addressed by training, but there is a need to have, there was a Supreme Court judgment also in 2020, they were trying to address it. They were saying that minimum there should be common secretariat, then specialization, one can move it, but cadre has to emerge. Otherwise, the small regulator, they will have always problem of the HR. Yeah. The cadre today and tomorrow, if it is so important institution in our economic life, the cadre has to emerge.
Yeah. We have time perhaps for one more question, if there's one. I can see you there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Nitin Sethi. Nitin Sethi, I was wondering, hearing all the panelists, is there a contradiction in the regulator being imagined as somebody who helps optimize or maximize the profits of its so-called stakeholders versus its accountability to the citizen? And their second layer of in the regulatory system that all of you reviewed, do you see enough competence build of the regulator being accountable not to its line ministry, but to citizenry at large?
Quick stab before I hand over to Ajay maybe, goes back to the point he made. There is a contract, he called it a contract in our parlance. The law that is written creating the regulator clearly specifies in the statement of objects and reasons on the purpose of regulation. So very often, and there is enough regulatory academic history and sort of literature on this, capture of regulators by regulated entities. So, for instance, the banking regulator, instead of protecting the customers of banking, ends up protecting the banks. And this is nothing new, nor peculiar to one jurisdiction. Across the world, regulated entities capturing regulators with their narrow agenda is well known. How do you solve it? Go back to regulatory design. Very narrowly define the objective of regulation and hence very narrowly confer powers. Because if you cover extensive powers, and this is something on which there is again a lot of literature in India, there is one section in the SEBI Act which says, in the interest of the market. 95% of SEBI's orders are in this subsection. Because if you give in the interest of market is just saying do whatever you want. So there is a lot that we need to do in terms of writing the right kinds of law. But Ajay, in case you have anything to add, or somebody else wants to add.
In essence, what Krishnan has said, that the puzzle lies in the appropriate drafting of the parliamentary law that has to, I use the word contract, but it is a parliamentary law, and it should have a market failure vision, that what is the problem in the society that this regulator is created to solve. All too often, what we have done is old Indian socialism, where the regulator is given sweeping powers to control the sector. And then that generally goes badly. And on the question of the citizenry, this turns on the checks and balances, on the accountability mechanisms. A whole body of work is required to think that a regulator should not merely become an exercise of arbitrary power, but it should be surrounded by checks and balances and accountability mechanisms. One of the best success stories of an accountability mechanism was the introduction of inflation targeting with central banks. So now you've got an accountability mechanism. Show me the inflation rate. You were supposed to deliver 4%. Did you deliver 4%? We can hold the organization accountable.
Regarding accountability within the structure, what all the regulators have started realizing, many regulators, sir has summarized, they were not going for public consultation. So first, public consultation also gives lots of input. Second is regulatory impact assessment. Third one is, if they are not doing it, the report should be the public. It should be made mandatory. Every 3 years, you have to go for regulatory impact assessment. Third one is, each regulator should come out with reports how they are performing. And all kinds of MIS in IBBI, we were always, every month we used to come out, how many cases has come, what we have done. So anyone who wants to read anything about insolvency, it's very rich. Regulator has started from the day one. So more disclosure of the information is also required. So something can be done immediately and something which requires a structural change.
Thank you. Thanks, Gyanesh. Before I hand over the mic to you, because Prachi, for ICPP, I think at least 5-6 major work areas, starting with Ajay, regulatory theory, big picture, design, Rajiv's point about process. He said he has managed to get an enormous amount of gain just by better implementation. This is something which also came up later. So process improvement, he drew attention to HR 3, and this is, I think, increasingly going to be important, both in food and pharma. When the incidence of impact is national, having state regulators who can impact not only the nation, but the globe, is a complete reversal of anything that you and I have studied in economics. This needs to be revisited. It's a difficult area, but I think we need to work on this. Jayant's point, again, competence, and more important, do you hand over core functions of the regulator to an external agency? And I think it's a critical point. This is something on which the Reserve Bank of India has done a lot of work in terms of what cannot be delegated by regulated entities. But Jayant drew attention to this point in the regulator. And I think this another important point that he made, given the political nature of this beast, and it is, I think, a good beast because electricity should excite politicians because it affects people. How do we still get regulation right? There is a design issue here, and I think we need to work on this. Lots of good points by Gyanesh. Technology as an enabler, and again, process improvement. Importance of regulatory appointments. He spoke about it politely, but I think this is the elephant in the room. HR, capacity building, silos, because regulators are now cross-cutting. The data protection guy will, or lady, will be a regulator over every regulator. the C&AG of India is the super regulator for all regulators. The Vigilance Commissioner is somebody we didn't talk about, the regulator for all regulators. So how do you work out these interfaces? I think are all excellent areas. I'm leaving out some of other points he made, but I think we have enough work till our next conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krishnan, for that. And then let me also thank the panelists for like wide variety of views here. Actually, this discussion as well as the keynote before shows. I mean, both Prachi and I might have a bias towards macro, but regulation is definitely turning up to be the most exciting, priority area for us at ICPP. So thank you so much again, Prachi. I think you are on the hook again to just felicitate, all our panelists, and then just hand over the. No, it's the same. Yes,